Welcome to the BuyBox Experts podcast. We bring to light the unique opportunities brands face in today's e-commerce world.
Hi, I'm James Thompson, one of the hosts of the BuyBox Experts podcast. I'm a partner with BuyBox Experts and the former business head of the Selling on Amazon team at Amazon, as well as the first account manager for the Fulfillment by Amazon program. I'm the co-author of a couple of books on Amazon, including the recent book, Controlling Your Brand in the Age of Amazon. Today's episode is brought to you by BuyBox Experts. When you hire BuyBox Experts, you receive the strategy optimization and marketing performance to succeed on Amazon. BuyBox Experts combines executive-level advisory services with expert performance management and execution of your Amazon channel strategy. Go to buyboxexperts.com to learn more. Before I introduce our guest today, I want to send a big shout out to the team at Disruptive Advertising. For off-Amazon advertising, Disruptive Advertising offers the highest level of service in the digital marketing industry. Focusing on driving traffic, converting traffic, and enterprise analytics, Disruptive helps their clients increase their bottom line month after month. Check out disruptiveadvertising.com to learn more. Today, our guest is Sajag Agarwal, founder of Movley and a former seven-figure Amazon seller. In 2015, he started his first e-commerce brand, which he grew to over $2 million a year in less than 2 years. Plagued with quality control problems, Sajag moved from China for 6 months, opening an office in Shenzhen, and spent his time on the factory floor. He watched inspectors fraudulently pass his bad production orders, so he started doing his own inspections. And out of frustration, in 2018, he founded Movley to make manufacturing overseas easier and more controllable. Movley brings tech, data analytics, and a better process to do inspections more efficiently. Sajag, welcome, and thank you for joining us today on the BuyBox Experts podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, James. And I'm super excited. And to everybody listening, hopefully this is super valuable and you guys get a lot of actionable insights from this.
So let me start by asking you, as your company name suggests, you help brands build and move products continuously through the supply chain. Unlike most Amazon private label sellers that source out of China, you saw firsthand what actually happens on the factory floor. It makes me nervous to think what kinds of products are showing up on Amazon today that the sellers think have passed some sort of quality control evaluation. Let me ask you, what should private label sellers be thinking about with regards to quality control systems today?
Yeah, that's huge. Thank you for that question. So yeah, I mean, in terms of returns in e-commerce are about 4 times higher than returns in brick and mortar. And that's just general e-commerce. On Amazon, my hunch is it's even higher for a lot of different products. And when it comes down to such a high return rate and having reviews for your products, the quality control demands from buyers on the e-commerce side of things are much, much higher than buyers on the brick and mortar side of things. So when it comes to quality control and inspections, things like that, e-commerce brands should be getting a lot deeper into all those kind of things because it's going to be a bigger performance driving element for their sales versus a brick and mortar comparative.
So I'm a private label seller on Amazon. I get my stuff in China. I have some company doing inspections. You're telling me that there may be some problems in that inspection process. How do I, as a seller based in the US, how do I start to vet things without having to physically be in China all the time?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. And the truth is it's hard. It's really hard, working halfway across the world to manufacture your products. And when it comes to the process, what I mostly see when it comes to the inspection process, which is kind of the critical fail points, is the inspection process is not really thorough. So if you go on like other websites and you go look at inspection companies, things like that, they actually publish on their website that, hey, we do a workmanship inspection on maybe 500 units or something up to that. And the function tests and the wear and tear test, product conformity test, they just do that on 1 to 3 units. And that's a big problem because when you're only testing 3 units for function and you're just looking at the rest of the products and you're like, wow, these products look good. That's not really a answer of, yeah, these products are built properly. These products are doing what they're supposed to do. And that's when you start having issues. So if you have a 20% defect rate, every time you pick a unit, you have an 80% chance of picking a good unit. So if you pick 3 good units, that inspection is a pass with 0 defects, not even 1 defect.
So then let's do some simple math here. If I'm getting 1,000 units of something built and I've had reasonable manufacturing in the past and I don't anticipate there's going to be a big problem, How many of those 1,000 units do you propose that I go and have product tested?
Yeah, so we recommend using the ISO 2859 model. And essentially, ISO stands for International Organization of Standards. So
Mhm,
these guys have
mhm.
spent a ton of money developing a statistical model to determine how many units you should quality control and inspect.
Okay.
So they actually have a system called AQL, acceptable quality limits, and that also proposes some sample sizes. So there's three levels of sample sizes: so level 1, level 2, level 3.
Mhm.
So level 1 is meant to be kind of a very quick inspection. Level 2 is kind of a normal inspection. So if you sell to a brick and mortar store, a lot of times they'll ask you for a level 2 inspection report.
Okay.
Then level 3 is the highest sample size that model goes. That's actually what I recommend for Amazon sellers primarily, because when with Amazon sellers, you have a much higher risk of quality control problems, returns,
Yes.
things like that.
Yes.
So we generally recommend level 3. So like for an order of 1,000, that's about
Yep.
125 units for level 3 inspection.
That's a lot of units. I can understand why someone would want to have thorough reviews the first couple times they're working with a manufacturer. Do you see the need for thorough level 3 inspections continuing as you've had more and more experience working with a particular manufacturer?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So for 1,000 units, a level 3 might be 125 units, which might be a little bit high. But for 10,000 units, it's not really that much more. So on smaller orders, the percentage is much higher than larger
Okay.
orders with
Okay.
this statistical model. So in the grand scheme of things, even at 1,000 units, we're only looking at about 12.5% of the units. So it's not really a ton of units. So generally level 2 and level 3, the entire ISO system is built for ongoing inspections. So actually level 3 is kind of a minimum threshold that we recommend for Amazon sellers. If you're doing consistent manufacturing with a supplier, you should be doing at least level 2, level 3 inspections on every order.
Mhm.
And on your first orders where you have a lower risk tolerance and you want to do some more checks, it might even be worthwhile to go above a level 3. So some customers go as high as 100%. Obviously, I don't think that's really required, honestly,
Mhm.
because it's just, you can get the similar results from doing a statistical sample size. But level 3 is really kind of a baseline for those higher risk orders. A lot of customers opt to go even beyond that. So they, hey, maybe want to do 200 units or 250.
So you keep using this word risk, and I realize risk could play out in many different ways. What does risk look like to a private label seller? Are there certain types of products that are riskier than others when you think about manufacturing?
Yeah,
How,
that's
how
a
do you think about risk?
Yeah, so I think about risk in terms of how expensive the product is to produce and what the margins are on the product. So
Okay.
say you have a $1 product
Yep.
and you make a $5 product margin on it, $5 per unit sold. If that product breaks or something happens, it's not that big of a deal. You can replace that product and still break even. So maybe customer reviews are going to be an issue, but replacements, warranty claims, returns, it
Yep.
may not be such a big of an issue. But
Yep.
if you're selling a $20 or $30 product and your margin is only $10 on that product, now one bad unit would take profit from 3 sales. So the returns and the warranty claims are much more impactful to your bottom line.
Okay.
So in those cases, your risk tolerance has to be much lower. So that way you can make sure that you're breaking even at the very least and making profit on your orders.
So you talk about product inspections, but there's also factory audits and being on the factory floor and looking at what's happening versus just looking at what's coming off the line. How do you think about these different types of evaluations that a seller might do of its manufacturer and of the products that come off the line?
Yeah, that's a good question. So factory audits are like in-depth reports into the factories. So quality control inspections for product inspections, those are things you should be doing on every single order
Okay.
to maintain that, there is if there are any problems, you find it. So for example, actually, we did a calculation that if you find about $3,000 of defective products, that alone pays for 10 inspections. When you factor in the freight costs, you factor in returns, you factor
Yep.
in all these additional expenses,
Yep.
that can easily pay for your inspections for 7 years if you do them quarterly, just on one small bad order of $3,000. And most sellers are ordering much, much more than that.
Right.
So
Right.
it
Right.
really
Right.
pays itself off. Factory audits, on the other hand, those are things that you do maybe periodically, say once a year, depending on how much volume you do with the supplier, or once before you start production with a certain supplier, to actually make sure that they're a partner that you can work with long term. So you can actually understand the factory, understand their processes, understand their systems, and say, okay, hey, this is a factory that has good quality control processes, good manufacturing processes. This is a factory that I can work with for the next 10 years.
Yep. Yep.
And then this factory here is maybe an owner just running out of his notebook, and maybe I don't want to work with that factory too much.
So when am I doing the product inspection? Am I doing it at the port? Am I doing it at the factory? Am I doing it once it arrives in the United States? How do you think about those, and how do you think about the trade-offs of these different stages where you could do the inspections?
Definitely. That's a really good question. So once it gets to the States, you've already paid to ship the products. And if there are any problems, you have to pay for them to be shipped back.
Yep.
And shipping back to China and other countries is actually much more expensive than shipping here. So at that point, you've kind of already lost your leverage and you've increased a lot of your expenses. So it might make sense to still do a quality control inspection there, but it's not the optimal point to do a quality control inspection. And same thing with the port. So what happens is most companies that do inspections at the port, they're freight forwarding companies and they're not really inspection companies. And the difference between the factory and the port is that when you're doing an inspection at the factory, you have access to the machinery at the factory, the quality control labs, the other machinery at the factory. You can also monitor the production, make sure the products are coming off good as they come off the production line.
Yes.
So you lose some of that ability when you're doing it at the port. And most companies that do inspections at the port, they're freight forwarding companies, and they also have a huge bias, which is to actually ship your products out, because if they don't ship your products, they don't make money.
So how do you get factory owners to agree to let a bunch of inspectors show up whenever to inspect products? How does that work?
That's a really good question. So it's actually a standard process for any major manufacturer, any major supplier to have third-party inspections done. Any major company, Fortune 500 company that does manufacturing, does inspections on all of their orders. So it's actually a fairly standard process, and most factories are okay with it from the get-go.
Okay. But, so as you become known for being a good inspector, I mean, there may be some factories that are, oh no, here comes Sajag and his team. But on the other hand, I mean, I suspect there can be a mutual respect that gets built over time, that you're making sure that everything stays appropriate. And it's not that you're trying to call out bad things, but bad things can happen whether somebody's actively doing it or whether the machine just breaks down.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, we've had a lot of factories give us pushback, and it's usually after the first inspection. So, most factories are accustomed to the usual inspections, which is just, go there, visually look at the products. But even if you have something, even just a shelf, maybe you want to do a weight test on the shelf to make sure it's built properly. Even the most simple products have tests, and we like to do them on the entire sample size. So that makes a huge difference for factories. We have actually had factories that would just stop us, maybe not give us enough space to actually do an inspection, not help us with some of the processes and things like that, and just not cooperate on the second inspection. But what we always like to do is when those kind of things happen, we always like to convey that information to clients, because first of all, it impacts the time of the inspection, which therefore impacts the cost. But also it's important for clients to know that, hey, these are issues that you're having with your factory, because if your factory is having a hard time, we're just checking the products according to your specifications. So if they have a hard time with us, they're really trying to give you a hard time at the end of the day. So we always like to convey that information to clients, because that's not a factory you want to work with long term.
So I'm a private label seller. I've hired you to do the inspections. You do the inspections, and the inspection fails, gloriously fails. What now? What do I do as a seller? What do you do as an inspector?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when it comes down to working with the factories, the first thing we recommend doing is just talking with the factories and saying, hey, these are the problems we're having. Where should we go from here? We're not able to sell these products, and kind of see what the supplier does. So there's kind of two ways to handle it. So generally, sometimes suppliers will agree to fix the problems, especially if they want to have a good relationship with you. So they'll fix the problems. And at other times, if it's too high of a cost or something like that, you can often split the cost. So some suppliers will agree to say, hey, the repair cost, let's say for this $10,000 order is $1,000. How about we split it 50-50? I'll pay $500, you pay $500, and we'll get the products repaired. So that could also be an option. But either way,
why am I paying for anything that my supplier doesn't manufacture properly?
That's a really good question. So it really comes down to building a relationship with your supplier. So a lot of people have this mindset with their suppliers that it's very transactional. Like, hey, I'm paying you to build an order, build it, get it over to me. The thing is that a lot of times bad quality comes from miscommunication. And it comes from the fact that they're using low quality materials or whatnot, but it also comes down pretty heavily to miscommunication.
Okay.
So that's what is really key. So when you're working with the supplier, you want to build a partnership with the supplier. So it's almost like it's kind of like an olive branch. Like, hey, I understand that, maybe we miscommunicated, maybe you miscommunicated, but we're willing to front some money, and split the cost, so that way we can fix this problem. Obviously, that's not ideal, but that's something that could be really helpful to protect the relationship. with that supplier, if they are a good supplier, and what could just be, a general misunderstanding.
So Sajag, what do you do in a situation where your manufacturer says that it does its own inspections? Are there situations where it makes sense for the manufacturer to do its own inspections and you don't need an external inspector?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So every manufacturer should be doing their own inspections on the production line and actually doing multiple points of inspections, as well as randomly sampling units in the production, after the production, to make sure the products are built properly.
Okay.
And that's not really a replacement for third-party inspections, because that's the factory's internal quality control to make sure that they have good product.
Okay.
And then the third-party inspections are more so inspections that represent you. So they're checking for your specifications. They're making sure that, hey, the supplier did build your products properly, and their internal quality control systems are built up to the standard. Because the suppliers actually, it's a little bit of game theory. Suppliers have an incentive to get you the cheapest product that they can sell to you, because then they make the most profit, while you have the incentive to get the cheapest product of the highest quality, so you can sell it to your customers and protect your brand. So at the end of the day, the third-party inspections protect you, whereas internal inspections should be done either way, and they're protecting the supplier to make sure they're not redoing the production process.
So as a seller buying product, as a brand buying product in China, I'm going to have contracts with my manufacturers. Are there certain types of stipulations in the contract that I have with my Chinese manufacturer that I should be making sure that I've got certain things written in to help me with some of this inspection that I'm going to need to do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I always recommend, first of all, not going completely transparent on the inspection specifications, because a lot of times inspections can be gamed because you're not really testing the root cause, you're testing the symptoms. So for example, with a shelf, you're putting a weight on it to test the weight limit, but you're not actually testing the strength of the wood itself. So they can put, more layers of particle board to get to that same weight limit. So it really depends on kind of what your specifications are. I always like to say, don't be extremely transparent, but do tell the factory that, hey, we want to make sure the product meets all these specifications that we've agreed on. And the second part there is that when it comes to the overall factory specification, you want to make sure that the factory is aware that you have access to all the products at any time. So you can go in during manufacturing, you can check the production lines, see your products being produced, you can check your products after production. You're not in any way held contractually to buying your products without examining it, opening it, reviewing everything, even if that means they have to repackage the products. So that's very important to include on the contract, because these are your goods and you have the final control to buy it. And you need to have that ability to see your products, inspect them. Maybe you want to see them yourselves. Maybe you want to hire an inspection company, whatever it might be. You want to have access to your products before you have to actually pay for them.
So you've talked about all sorts of things that can go wrong by not doing inspections at the right time or doing them thoroughly enough. Let's put those situations aside. I'm a well-established brand. I source product out of China. I've been doing it for years. What are some of the mistakes I may not realize I'm still doing when it comes to inspections?
Yeah, the biggest mistake that I've seen is just having a lack of a proper checklist for quality control and inspections. So what happens is that in most cases, like even in my case, when I was running my Amazon brand, we were doing everything by the book. We were doing inspections every single order. And after 2 years of getting just past inspections, we continued to get past inspections, but then started having quality defects in our products. We were seeing 5 to 10% of our products broken on arrival. We were seeing other products breaking after a few months of use, almost 100% on some SKUs. And this was all despite getting past inspections. And what we learned is that when it comes to inspections, all of these issues could have been prevented if we had a proper checklist in place. And the checklist was actually done on a statistical sample size of the units. So what in most cases, what happens with inspections is you're just doing a visual inspection. So you want to make sure you're actually testing the exact function of the product. If you have a paper cup, maybe you want to fill it up with water to make sure the paper cup doesn't leak. If you have electronics, maybe you want to plug it in. Like if you have a lamp, you want to screw in a light bulb and make sure, hey, this lamp works. So these are all things that are really, really important and that you should be doing on every single order. So what I always recommend doing, because a lot of brands, even the well-established ones, all the way down to the small brands, they may not know exactly how to come up with tests for their products. They think their inspection company is doing all the tests for them. The truth of the matter is inspection companies, they inspect a wide variety of products. You can have a dollar store comb. You can also have a luxury comb. And those are still combs, but flimsiness in one is not
right.
Whereas flimsiness in the other one is fine. So inspection companies can never truly define what is the true quality specs of your product. And and allowing them to do that, what ends up happening is they just, go for it and they just visually inspect your products and say, hey, this looks good. They're not actually doing any, tests, any function tests, things like that to actually make sure your products are built well. So providing that information, talking with your suppliers, understanding what they do for quality control, talking with other suppliers, especially in the sales process. If you're talking with other manufacturers, that's a great time to understand what are the specs, what are the tests that inspections can do. They do their own internal inspections that you can do, and then provide that to the inspection company and then do that on every inspection. And that is what makes one of the biggest impacts, because if you're plugging in 3 units and to make sure it works, and you have a sample size of 1,000 units, then 1 unit works. That doesn't mean anything. You really need to be testing at least those 125 units and plugging in each one of those units to make sure it works, because that's going to tell you, okay, hey, your product is built properly, your product is not. Because a visual inspection is it's not really a catch-all.
Right.
So I would say that's the biggest mistake that I've seen.
So you're talking for the last, for the whole discussion here, you're talking about a lot of inspection things, which if you go back 5 years ago when you were a private label seller and you were building products and lo and behold, you discovered that there was a major set of product defects. How did you decide I'm actually going to learn a whole industry and become an expert in this, and I'm going to build a company and I'm going to do this, when in fact that wasn't your initial calling, getting into this space? To take me through that journey, because your path is unusual for someone to say, what I want to do when I grow up is set up an inspections company.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I started off with e-commerce, just flipping products on eBay. So I was actually out with my mom, and she takes hours to shop. So I was just kind of bored out of my mind, and I was on eBay, and I found out I could buy 100 units of a product that I was looking at for like $100, and then each unit was selling individually for like $6-7.
Okay.
So that's when I actually got into e-commerce. I started buying bulk on eBay and then selling individually on eBay. And then eventually I started building my own brand. So 5 years ago, I started my own e-commerce brand on Amazon. I was like, hey, I'm just buying and flipping all this junk. I could be doing a lot better. So 5 to 6 years ago, I started my Amazon brand. We grew super quickly. Our first year we did 40K. Second year we did $1 million. And our third year we were on track to do 2 million that year. But what ended up happening is we started facing huge quality control problems.
Yes.
That's actually when I moved over to China, and I lived there for 6 months.
Yes.
And I was basically doing my own inspections. And I actually watched my inspectors at one point show up 5 hours late to an 8-hour inspection, and then basically just pass a defective batch of products that I had inspected myself. This was a pretty large multinational company. And at one point, I even actually hired my own in-house team in Shenzhen, and we had our own office. And that team actually started taking bribes from the factory as well. And they got a little bit too close from the factory.
Wow.
So it was just an absolute, mess. And what ended up happening is that we actually ended up having to shut that brand down on the third year just because of quality control problems. So that's actually something that's really dear and near to my heart, because after that experience, I went and talked with a lot of different sellers, and I was like, hey, inspections could fix my problems. I was doing inspections in every order. Why were we not having these issues? And I started asking a lot of people, and I was like, do you trust your inspections company? And everybody I spoke to was like, no, we don't trust our inspections company, but it's better than doing nothing. And I was like, it's 2018. We got Elon Musk here making Neuralink, and we can't even make sure that, we have good inspections, in a different country. We got FaceTime, we got all this kind of stuff. And that's actually when I got into Movley, because I was like, okay, hey, we can make a huge impact in this industry. And, there's no reliance, no trust, no reliability with inspection companies, because there's no visibility, there's no transparency. And all of these issues could be fixed just by implementing, implementing some better processes that I've seen myself when I was in China. And I started learning more about the industry, understanding how it was built and how it was systematically built to pass your bad products. And that's when I started working into Movley. So like with Movley also, we're working on like a tech platform that we're looking to build out, which actually is going to streamline and pull data analytics on inspectors, real-time inspection data. We're also trying to like splice up body camera footage to be able to actually put it into the report. So that's not something we do right now, but that's something we're working towards. And that can really help increase the visibility, the control, and things like that of inspections. So I realized, how much of an impact this can have and how many people were affected. And especially as we started recruiting for our initial employees, a lot of our employees came from companies or former employees of companies that actually shut down because of similar issues that I had. And that's when I realized, this is not a small issue. This is a widespread problem that every brand has, whether they're a small business all the way down to enterprises. And it's because of bad process, fraud, and bribery. and a lot of different issues when it comes to the inspection process. And that's when I started Movley, because I really wanted to make an impact and prevent people from going through the same issues that I went through and having to go move to China and then have, your employees get bribed by your suppliers. It was just absolutely ridiculous and very messy.
You've been an entrepreneur for much of your adult life. Since you started being in business for yourself, what has changed in your perspective about taking risk and biting off bigger and bigger opportunities?
That's a really good question. So I previously was adamant about just like, okay, we can do anything, we can build anything. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And actually, throughout my journey, what I've learned is that, at the end of the day, it's people, and that's what it comes down to. And I think people is really interesting, because if you look at it from the perspective of people, whether it's inspections, whether it's building a company, you can really see how a company is built. So for example, a lot of people are like, hey, I found one really good Amazon product. Let me scale this to 20 other products, and I can just sell products in random different industries and just, sell the best products and make a lot of money. And that could work. And it works really well when you're the one running it and you're driven by the profits. But when you have a team of people working and you're trying to build out multiple brands, you're trying to build out multiple things, it's not as transactional. And people need something to latch onto. People need something to work on. They need a holistic perspective, and they need something to build towards. And that's what makes them run effectively, because the people that you hire and you work with, they're not going to have the same passion you have, because they're not driven by the same motivating factors.
Right.
So when it comes to companies and entrepreneurship, to build something really big, you have to have a vehicle that encourages people to work towards something in that vehicle. So that's actually my whole mindset, and my mantra has changed very completely. So previously, when I started Amazon, I was like, okay, I want to sell all these different products. Then I realized, I can't, no matter, even if I hire the best people and bring them into the company, they're not going to be able to work in this mindset, because they're not motivated by money. They're motivated by brand. They want to see their brand become big. So I can't have them working on 20 different brands and things like that. So looking at the things from the lens of people, that's been my biggest change throughout my journey.
Let me ask you, with COVID and the trade war and all this delightful stuff that private label sellers have had to face in the last year and a half, what do you see as the future of manufacturing in China? Where do Amazon private label sellers, how is their interaction with China going to change?
Yeah, so I think it's very similar to what we saw when China rose to manufacturing, to a manufacturing power. So China started out originally as a land for the big companies, the enterprises, to build facilities, contract out widespread manufacturing. And it was just simply not possible to do it unless you had really deep pockets, really deep volumes to get into that country. And now, as it's evolved, as it's grown, now anybody can go in and manufacture in China, even mom and pop shops. So I'm just kind of seeing, my prediction is that it's going to be very similar to other countries also, like India, Vietnam, Taiwan. It's going to first be dominated by enterprises. So we're seeing a lot of companies moving out of China for manufacturing. So they're moving from China to India. They're building more facilities. They're creating more business opportunities there. And they're able to do that because these are really big enterprises that are moving over. So we're going to start seeing that happen more so in other countries. And then as those countries' manufacturing bases develop, then it will start catering more towards small business sellers. So I do think that in the future, we're going to have a lot of more diversified manufacturing base. But one thing nice about China, though, is it combines all the industries under one country. Whereas with other countries like India, Vietnam, they specialize in different industries.
Yes.
Whereas in China, it's just a different region for a different industry. It's like multiple countries in one. So that's one of the biggest things that I see. But I do see that there's going to be a huge outflow of Amazon sellers, of big companies, small companies alike, manufacturing in other countries over the next decade or so.
I want to wrap up by asking you a question around what are some of the up and coming brands and companies that you see that we should be paying attention to that are helping e-commerce companies, private label sellers do exciting things? Are there companies we should be keeping an eye on that many of us may not have heard of yet?
That's a really good question. So I'm not too sure of any companies specifically that I want to call out that we may not know of. But one company that is really interesting in the space that I'm sure you've heard of is Helium 10. So Helium 10 was actually acquired by a company called Assembly just a few months ago. And Assembly, if you look at their website, they've been out acquiring a lot of other companies in the e-commerce space. And Helium 10 is also starting to expand into operations to a lot of different areas. So I think Helium 10 is on their way to create some really awesome stuff for Amazon sellers. So that's been really interesting. I've been actually reading more into that recently. So that's one company I pay attention to. Other companies I pay attention to, I'm not too sure. I think Metrics is also really interesting, the way that they do things, but I'm not too particularly sure on, any other companies that maybe we've not heard of. But those are the two companies that I'd pay attention to, and I think they're fairly well known.
One last question. You're in the business of basically trying to find the cheats, trying to find the guys that are trying to shortchange your clients. How has your mentality changed being in the business of looking for bad guys rather than looking for opportunities to grow a business without having to get into the interpersonal issues?
That's a good question. So I don't like to look at it from the perspective that we're catching bad guys. I like to look at it from the perspective that we're here to protect your customers and your brand on the ground, to make sure your products are good. And that happens whether you're working with good suppliers or bad suppliers, because you can work with the best suppliers and they could have failed inspections. And then it's more relationship, hey, let's improve this, let's build this up. And, let's get this into a better position so we can work together more in the future. Yep. So I don't think I wouldn't like criminalize or like put a bad vibe towards manufacturing in China or anything like that. There's a lot more good guys than there are bad guys. And when it comes down to it, it's just really about catching those problems for your customers and making sure that's good, because you can have that bad order on your first order. It could be your second order. It could be your 20th order. Yes. And that's just the natural flow of business, because the supplier wants to maximize their profits. You want to maximize your quality. And there's just a little bit of a disconnect, and kind of motivation. It's that people theory that I was talking about. The factory's working towards more profits and lower costs, and you're working towards better quality and brand. So it's two different motivating driving factors. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we kind of come in and we help you make sure that that's happening and your side is protected as you grow your brand. So that's the way that I like to look at it.
Strong stuff. Good stuff. Sajag, I want to thank you for joining us today on the BuyBox Experts podcast. For those of you interested in learning more about Movley, please see movley.com. Thanks again, and join us again next time on the BuyBox Experts podcast. And now to finish today's podcast, I'd like to share some final thoughts. For third-party sellers to be successful on Amazon, a critical lever will be soliciting feedback from customers. We at BuyBox Experts are really big fans of the team at Ecom Engine and its tools that help Amazon sellers to simplify the process of messaging customers of Amazon orders. To learn more, go to ecomengine.com. And with that, I want to thank you for listening today, and I look forward to joining you next time on the BuyBox Experts podcast.
Thanks for listening to the BuyBox Experts podcast. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web, and we'll see you next time.